Good morning. It is a joy to be here with you today. I met Hannah at General Assembly in Pittsburgh last summer, and she invited me to come guest preach after a conversation we had about my dissertation and the work I'm doing. It's always fun to see different congregations, and on this trip, I got to visit my eldest son who lives in Madison. So thank you again for inviting me here today. It was the Tuesday before the 2018 Super Bowl, which was to be held in Minneapolis that year, when I received a call from the leader of the Black Visions Collective, wondering if I would be willing to show up for a direct action planned for Super Bowl Sunday. The call was a clear and radical ask. Would we white folks be willing to risk arrest by literally using our bodies, and ministerial authority in my case, as shields by shutting down the light rail line into Minneapolis, and by doing so, creating a safer environment for the message of the Black Visions Collective to be centered and heard? As I moved toward responding to this call, it became abundantly clear to me that this difficult ask constituted an undeniable manifestation of my Christian roots, calling me to live out Jesus's teachings of loving God by loving my neighbor, and to follow his example of being in solidarity with the least of these. Further, this difficult task also constituted a clear manifestation of my Unitarian Universalist faith, embraced as an adult, which, as you well know, proclaims that we all spring from a common source, share a common destiny, and participate in the promise of salvation for all. This inclusive faith, this faith without a creed, this faith responsive to the plight of the least of these, is reflected powerfully in the principles of our association. If I truly believe that every person is of sacred worth and dignity, and if I accept that we are all in this together, one human family, one planet, one common destiny, then I am called to embrace my neighbor's full humanity, to listen to their truths and experience, and to let them shape my soul as we work together to create a world that is worthy of our children's common destinies. After talking to the protest organizer about what would be involved, and after consulting my family and with the congregation where I was serving at the time, I decided to say yes, to answer the call of love and justice that my faith demands. No matter the ultimate cost, I could not say no. My only and authentic answer had to be yes. I fully and I hope humbly acknowledge that being with this collective during the 3 days of training it took to prepare for the action changed me. I now know it is possible to build the world we say we want to build, because there we were, a multiracial, multicultural, intergenerational group of folks who had never met one another before, but who worked together, followed and trusted Black leadership, and took risks for justice we had never imagined possible. Standing in the freezing cold on Super Bowl Sunday, I was moved to tears by the powerful message delivered by the members of the Black Visions Collective. They demanded that we divest from policing big events for the privileged few, and instead invest in communities of color and trans folks who are in vastly more need than the people sitting in the stadium. They demanded that we treat sex workers as victims and end the cash bail system that makes poverty a crime. They promised to continue fighting until Minneapolis is not just safe, but full of joy and possibility. They invited us to imagine a different future, where there's a roof over every head, where Black children can dream big and can live free and healthy lives, and where Black bodies are not used as currency on sports fields, in prisons, or in wars. As we stood there, arms locked across the rail lines, we also witnessed joy. The collective singing, dancing, and demanding full humanity for all. One of the chants that the collective sang that day has stuck with me. It goes like this: "It is a duty to avenge the suffering of our ancestors, earn the respect of future generations, and be willing to be transformed in the service of this work." As I witnessed their fierce and joyful resistance, I chanted with them in my heart. You colonized our home and we always resisted. You put us in chains and we always resisted. You exploited our labor and we always resisted. You took Philando, Marcus, and Jamar from us, and we always resisted. Following this powerful experience of collaborative direct action as a Unitarian Universalist, I was left with facing some difficult questions. How might we honor the courage of our ancestors and be worthy inheritors of our faith? And how might we also boldly pass this faith to a new generation? Since I am a theologian at heart, today I want to focus specifically on the theological heritage of our faith that may offer fruitful and life-giving resources for responding to such daunting questions. Now, by theology, I mean something beyond meditating on our smallness in the scheme of things, and more encompassing than the classical definition of theology as simply God talk. As a Unitarian Universalist theologian, in my view, theology constitutes critical and creative reflection on the basic principles of Unitarian Universalism, principles that are not dogmas and doctrines, but rather diverse teachings, paths, and traditions, as well as the multiple sources on which they draw. As you know, these teachings can vary widely. Some are theistic, some are humanistic, some non-theistic or atheistic. Ultimately, theology helps us ask questions about what is true or untrue, what is right or wrong, what is beautiful or ugly, what is life-giving or death-dealing. Furthermore, rooted in the liberal theological tradition, our Unitarian Universalist theology should help us articulate a sense of meaning and ethical orientation, helping us envision the world we long to bring into being. Thus, our justice work in particular should be grounded in our theology, our spiritual practices, and our rituals. A critical question for those of us engaged in rigorous theological reflection becomes, how does our theological heritage inform our racial justice work? Early Unitarians, in the name of Scripture and reason, rejected the Trinity in favor of the unity or oneness of God, a unity that offers profound connection to divinity. The Reverend William Ellery Channing believed that every person carries a seed of goodness, a divine spark. In his Likeness to God sermon preached in 1828, he says, "The idea of God sublime is the idea of our own spiritual nature, purified and enlarged to infinity. In ourselves are the elements of divinity. God, then, does not sustain a figurative resemblance to man. It is the resemblance of a parent to a child, the likeness of a kindred nature." In this passage, Channing affirms that all of us are worthy because we belong to something greater than ourselves that connects us to one another. You can choose to call this God, Buddha nature, the interconnected web, or simply love. Martin Luther King Jr. drew on this inherent understanding of the worth and dignity of all and called this the network of mutuality, tied together with one destiny. This theological truth contends that at the very heart of our lives abides a transforming and sustaining love. It is inherent in me and you. This love demands to be made manifest here on earth, and it links us together in an inextricable network of beauty, pain, and hope. In my own theologizing, I name as God the interdependent web of existence, which calls me to love my neighbor as myself. Bernard Loomer, a Unitarian theologian writing in the late 1970s, describes beautifully how love works in the interconnected web of life. We love because we are interdependent, because we enter into each other's lives. Love does not create our essential interrelatedness. Love is an acknowledgement of it. Love is an acknowledgement of the fact that we are bound to each other because we live and are fulfilled in, with, and through each other. We love because a failure to love is a denial of the other, ourselves and our relatedness. It results in a diminution of all of us, including God. I take deeply to heart Loomer's affirmation that love is not something that creates interconnectedness. Love is our acknowledgement of it. It's the acknowledgement of the oneness we share with our neighbor and the earth. Love is a commitment to expand the depth of our souls, to include everything and everyone. In its ultimate form, love is divine. The commitment to open ourselves to all that is present in our lives and in our world, as well as all that is past and all that is possible. Participating in the Super Bowl protest, opening myself up to the grief and anguish, and yes, joy, of my Black brothers and sisters was painful, but to turn away from loving my neighbor would have meant denying their lived experience, as well as our interrelatedness. Both our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors recognize that whatever we do or do not believe about God, love makes a profound claim on our lives. American Universalism, like its spiritual sister American Unitarianism, began as a radical and optimistic Christian heresy in response to the grim doctrines of the 18th century Calvinistic Puritanism. In direct contradiction to Puritanism's gloomy gospel of retribution, the early Universalists boldly proclaimed that the essential qualities of God are not wrath, disgust, and judgment, but goodness, mercy, and love. Our Universalist ancestors believed in the simple yet radical idea that God's love was so big and all-encompassing that no one would be left out. No one would be consigned to eternal damnation. In place of Calvin's doctrine of predestination, Universalists held to the radical idea that all human beings share a common destiny. The division between the saved and the unsaved is non-existent. Therefore, the greatest commandment is to love God with all one's heart, mind, and soul, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. I believe in this so powerfully, I actually put it on my stole. It says, love God and neighbor. And again, for me, God is the interdependent web. Universalist minister and suffragette Olympia Brown preached that the people of all the nations are children of God and must all share the wealth of the world. Brown also recognized that her faith implied that if we have all one God, or again, if we are all in this interconnected web, then we are all kindred. Thus, everyone is worthy of our love, and all are sacred. Our Universalist heritage calls us to be a community of love, where all are included and no one is left outside the circle. At a time when our nation is deeply divided and our democracy severely threatened, I can think of no better place to put our efforts than to commit to building a more just and socially conscious democracy. Drawing on our rich and challenging theological heritage, let us put our faith into action by exerting our moral courage and our ethical power to bring about the political change necessary to continue dismantling the systems that uphold white supremacy. As so eloquently demanded by the Black Visions Collective on Super Bowl Sunday in 2018, let us work to create communities where love and justice define the interrelatedness and interdependence of all people. It is precisely this magnificent theological heritage that calls Unitarian Universalists to work for justice in the world. Our belief that each person is sacred and worthy of dignity, and that whatever we may or may not believe about God, we know that love as a way of being makes a profound claim on our lives. Love calls us to build the beloved community together, one body, one human family, and we share a common destiny. When the news of the day includes yet another shooting of a Black man at the hands of police, or anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim hate crimes due to the wars in the Middle East, we can take refuge in and inspiration from our faith. During these precarious times, we can turn to our faith for strength, hope, and solidarity. We can come back and again to the message of Unitarian Universalism, to the call for an inclusive welcome and universal solidarity, to the unwavering message that every human being is a child of God, deserving of love, justice, and dignity. It was radical 300 years ago when most houses of worship preached hellfire, division, and damnation, and it is still radical today when we dare to proclaim that there are no other people's children, no other people's fate. Our lives are more deeply interconnected and intertwined than we may ever know. Amen.